Good morning, Chicago. Today's conversation is really about, as I said earlier, an African-American agenda. Whether or not there ought to be one, how it is that we engage one and advance one, that is to say, an African-American agenda, in the era of Obama. How do we advance an African-American agenda in the era of Obama? And how do we do that in what many are calling a post-racial America? What about a black agenda in the era of Obama in a so-called post-racial America? I'm joined at this table by a number of distinguished Americans. I'll introduce them as we get to them in this conversation, but it's important for me to say at the top of this conversation that everything said around this table, and I hope when you get involved, everything said in this room will be rooted in love. That everything said at this table and everything, y'all didn't clap loud enough on that. Everything will be rooted in love. As a matter of fact, I want to make sure that love is so central to this dialogue. Well, as a matter of fact, hold on.
Okay.
We're going to keep love at the center of this conversation all day today. I don't need to say much more because it's not about me, it's about the conversation. I want to jump right into it. I want to start, though, with defining some terms, which I think is important. Because over the last couple of weeks, last few weeks, since making the announcement about this conversation here at Chicago State, about this black agenda, I've received mail from all kinds of Americans who think that the very notion, Dr. Dyson, the very notion of a black agenda is reductionist, it's pejorative, it's exclusionary, it's racist, it's divisive. So we have to start, it seems to me, with defining the terms here. So let me come to you first. When we talk about a black agenda, what do we mean by that?
When I think about the black agenda, I think about the history of this country. That is to say that at its origins, a notion of universal democracy was put forth as the predicate for constituting a new nation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and it meant men, are created equal. In that universal conception, all men, given a patriarchal society and the way in which all was signified by male, there were many people excluded. Women were excluded, slaves were excluded, people of color were excluded, First Nation people were excluded, of course slaves were excluded. So as the nation began to take shape and articulate its own self-understanding, what it felt democracy to be, what it felt justice to be, what it felt was the righteous path to take, people of color who were African slaves were systematically excluded from the larger circle of American privilege. So how do you reconcile, on the one hand, the expression of a document that celebrates the universal freedom of human beings and exclude folk on the other hand? Black leadership steps into the gap to try to articulate the grievances of exclusion of African American people from that larger circle of American privilege. And they began to defend the gains that are necessary to close the gap between the ideal and the reality. So from the very beginning, black leadership is about reinterpreting the fundamental premises of American democracy so that the ideals after which they aim can be embodied and the noble goals that they articulate can be lived up to. It is not, as you said, a pejorative and exclusionary practice to talk about a black agenda. The black agenda responds to the already excluded principles by which black people have been kept out. Now, the question is, in this particular era, as we evolve, we think about the fact that during slavery, we had black leaders who expressed our grievances and talked about our gains and talked about our group identity. We did that during Reconstruction. We did that during Jim Crow law and legal segregation. We did that during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. We did that during the 70s when there was a white backlash. And we must do that now in this so-called post-racial era. A black agenda is nothing more than the possibility of African American people being included in American democratic experimentation without hindrance or limitation or encumbrances, number one. Number two, what's very important to say, we are not un-American, we are ultimate Americans. We express our ultimate patriotism by being able to love the country. It was James Baldwin who said, "I love this country more than any nation on the earth, which is why I reserve the right to criticize her perpetually." So my point is, a black agenda is about making America live up to its best and noble ideas and to express the ways in which African American people have been excluded and how we must now be included in that. And then finally, often we have been rejected into America. We have been seen as the litmus test for what is authentically American only after we have defined what is not American. A lot of people did not see Martin Luther King Jr. as a hero. A lot of people did not see W.E.B. Du Bois as a hero. A lot of people didn't even see Nannie Helen Burroughs as a hero, or Fannie Lou Hamer, or Ella Baker. These are people who had the temerity, the unabashed gall to stand up against America and say, "No, you ain't doing it right. What you call America is not America. What we think is America is what you said." Dr. King said the night before he died, "Be true to what you said on paper." Black leadership expresses a black agenda that wants America to become better and more noble in its aspirations, but at the same time pay attention to those who have been excluded. So when I think black agenda, I think of, even in the age of Obama, Mr. Obama is an extraordinary human being who is a great president, potentially. We love him. We think he's a marvelous human being. But at the same time, a black agenda is not qualified or surrendered because Mr. Obama is in the White House. Mr. Obama is the chief executive of the United States of America. He has a right to exercise his vision about what should happen. We as black leaders, black intellectuals, black critics, black public servants are here to defend a black agenda that may ironically be even more viciously assaulted when we have a black face on an American empire that has been historically insensitive to the cause and claims of black people. So when I see black agenda, I say, let's articulate what we need at this particular point in this post-racial era. And I'll end by saying this. I don't believe in a post-racial moment. I think we should have a post-racist moment. We should not look beyond the reality of race. We should look beyond the reality of racism. Black agendas are about America. When America is made best, black people stand up and articulate our visions, our dreams, our aspirations, our sentiments. We love Mr. Obama. We recognize he is a president. We must have prophets who tell the truth, and that's what we're doing here today.
Let's just put this on the table right now in love and address it. What about this notion that he's not the president of black America, he's the president of all of America?
First, I just want to say it's a blessing to be here. It's always a joy to talk about loving black people. We got to start with that notion that black people are worthy of being loved, and when you love folk, you hate the fact that they're being treated unfairly. You loathe the fact that they're not living lives of decency. I salute you, though, brother. Anytime I think of a black agenda, I think of Frederick Douglass, I think of Ella Baker, I think of A. Philip Randolph, I think of Martin King, I think of Malcolm X. What was it about all of them that they loved black people enough that they were willing to live and die for black people? They began with black folk on the chocolate side, and it spilled over to vanilla sides and red reservations and brown barrios and yellow slices. But it started with mama and daddy, it started with grandmama, and went on with the Jamal and Letitia. Now, so when I hear Brother Obama say he's president of all America, I say absolutely, and I am glad that you are. But one, black people helped make you president of all of America. And you come out of a tradition of a people that said we love the least of these, the poor, the orphan, the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, and we acknowledge that anytime you talk about black folk in America, you're talking about a state of emergency, especially for black poor and working people. So that when you talk about love, you're making it a priority to say, America, keep track of the prison industrial complex, keep track of the dilapidated housing, keep track of the disgraceful school systems, keep track of the unemployment rates and underemployment rates and unavailable health care, child care. That is what it means to talk about a black agenda. Now, what does that mean? That means that the black agenda has always been the best agenda for the nation. The best agenda for the nation. You turn to the 4th chapter of the great W.B. Du Bois' 1924 book, The Gift of Black Folk, and he talks about how black people emancipated democracy because we began with a constitution that was a pro-slavery document for 75 years. And we needed to emancipate white supremacist democracy into a multiracial democracy, and same was true with Jim Crow and Jane Crow. So the black agenda has always been the best agenda for the nation because it emancipated democracy, reconstructed freedom so that the least of these would be at the center or near the center of what it means to talk about public interest and common good. And in the age of Obama, there's a lot of confusion. Because to have a black face in a high place easily leads us to forget so many folks stuck in the basement of the house. And we get obsessed with the breaking through at the top, and we forget about the least of these. So we put pressure on our brother, loving pressure, but we already see that any president is under tremendous pressure from the strong, the corporate elites, Wall Street oligarchs, various powerful folk at the top, and can easily push Obama in such a way that he tilts too much toward the strong and doesn't focus the way he ought on the weak, on the poor, on working people. That's why we're here today. And I would want to add this too, that we don't have to ask permission from anybody to talk about black suffering and black social misery. We love who we want to love. And we love other folk whether they love us or not. That's what Martin Luther King was all about.
So that raises, in my mind, Angela Glover Blackwell from Policy Link. Please welcome Angela. That raises, Angela, in my mind, this question. Again, we're going to try to get all these questions out that we've been talking about in the barber shops and beauty salons and all the emails I've been getting from folk all across the country for the last couple of years. We're going to put all this stuff in love on the table today. And one of the questions that we get asked all the time, that I get asked all the time, Tavis, why are you just talking? Another conversation. Every year on C-SPAN, you're talking. Negro, you ain't done nothing. You ain't put nothing out. All you're doing is talking. I've heard that from everybody, not everybody, but a lot of folk, as you can imagine, across this country. My answer has been that before Barack Obama was even in the United States Senate, much less running for the White House, these conversations resulted in a document called The Covenant with Black America. And that book laid out a 10-point agenda to which we were going to hold everybody accountable when we got to 2008 who wanted to be president. We didn't know who was going to be in the race. Again, President Obama was not on the national scene. He was not a United States Senator at that time. So it was never about singling out, demonizing, casting aspersion on him or anybody else because the field had not yet been determined when we came together to put together this covenant with Black America. You were there. Policy Link was instrumental in putting that book together. Let's go back a few years. Again, before we were in the era of Obama, and talk about this Covenant with Black America agenda that laid out these 10 issues that mattered most to black folk and what we were going to do about it and how we were going to hold folk accountable once we got to 2008. So back me up a few years.
So happy to be here and so happy that you have asked me about the covenant, because as we're thinking about this question of do we need a black agenda, I want to remind everybody that we have a black agenda. We have a black agenda, and that process of putting together the covenant was so much the way I think it always has to be if you're serious. Whenever my staff says to me, we're going to a meeting, I say, what's the agenda? When they say we're having a meeting, I say, let's put together an agenda. And the agenda is the starting point, but just putting together the agenda doesn't solve the problem. You have to really dig down. Each one of the items on the agenda, how are we going to move it forward? What does it mean? What's underneath it? What's going to be the plan? And that's what we did when we put together the Covenant with Black America. We took the big issues like health, But we did a drill down and said, but what will it mean in our communities? How do we deal with the disparities? How do people even get into the situation we're in? What's happening in their environments that's leading to asthma and obesity and heart disease? So we talked about health, and we ended up talking about the absence of grocery stores. So that we developed an agenda and we did a drill down. We did the same thing when we talked about communities, urban communities. What's the urban agenda? It's about more than public housing. We talked about affordable housing and the fact that in America, where you live is a proxy for opportunity. It determines everything, and we explained that. These kinds of issues allowed us to be able to say, we know the areas where we have to focus, and then we looked at the data. Where are we? Where do we need to get to? That gap is what we addressed. How do we fill the gap? And we filled it with policy ideas. We took those policy ideas and we talked not only about what our elected officials needed to do, but we talked about what we needed to do. And so when you talk about an agenda, if all you want to do is put together an agenda, don't show up, because it's a waste of time. You put together an agenda to be able to lead to some change and achieve something. I want to suggest that we have fallen down, because not only did we do, here's the covenant with Black America, we said, here's the covenant in action. This is how you make it real. And when I go back and I look at the covenant in action, and I think about all the suggestions we made to the country about how we could make it real, we haven't done it. And so not only do I want to see us advance the agenda, I want to see us take it apart, disaggregate all those pieces, and ask, what do we want to hold others accountable for, and what do we want to be held accountable for? Just one thing I want to add, because we've mentioned President Obama. I've spent so much time in Washington working with the new president, and I have been amazed at how in this freeway of access, a freeway of access that brings us tea parties and brings us all kinds of opportunities for people to say whatever they want, he has been able to stay in the progressive lane. He's been able to stay in the progressive lane. And in that progressive lane, I have seen the covenant with Black America go through each one and be able to check off extraordinary things that are happening because this president gets it. And when I talk about the president getting it, people say, well, what about everything that's not happening? My response is, I can walk and chew gum at the same time. I can be a friendly critic at the same time that I can praise progress that's being made, and we all need to learn to do that. As we go forward in this conversation, I'll add more specificity, but the main point to remember is we have an agenda, but we haven't done our part to realize that agenda.
Please welcome from the Rainbow Push Coalition, the Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr.
Thank you.
Reverend Jackson, Angela suggests, she doesn't suggest, she says very clearly that we had an agenda and we fell down. It's clear to me, and I think to most of us around this table and in this room, that Black folk, again, we're going to put all this stuff on the table in truth and in love. Black folk were asked to do a lot of things to help elect this president. We were asked by the candidate at his campaign. We were asked by Black leaders to do any number of things to help get Barack Obama elected as our president. We were asked to walk precincts. We were asked to give money. We were asked to hold teas and coffees in our homes. We were asked to show up at rallies. We were asked to do a lot of things to help to activate our organizations. Black churches were asked to do any number of things. All of us in Black America were asked to do things to help elect this president. One of the things that's troubling, for me at least, and I want to get your take on this, is, to Angela's point, what Black folk have been asked to do since Barack Obama was elected president. Because if we're not being asked by Black leaders, if we're not being asked by Black organizations, if we're not being asked by the president we elected to get behind him to do A, B, C, D, and E, to help him advance an African-American agenda, then it seems to me that all the energy, all the effort, all the resources that we know we have, because we activated it to get him elected, those resources are now sitting dormant. So talk to me about what we have been asked to do, or not to do, as it were, since he's been elected president of the United States.
The good news is that the president sets a high moral bar. So I want to represent all of America. That's a big deal. Most presidents never made that commitment. They represented white male Americans, and then after fight, female Americans, and then labor Americans, and then Native Americans. And so the idea of a one big tent America is a new deal. Within that context, there are some Americans living in luxury and some living in pain. And that must, if your hand is cut to death, fingers cut, you don't wrap the four that's not bleeding, you wrap the one that's bleeding. And so our pain today, even as we deal with the healthcare challenge, and it is a real challenge, that in Chicago, 3,200 black Americans die a year from health disparity. More die a year in this city from health care disparity than in the 9/11 terrorist attack 10 years ago. Obviously, those in the most pain must have some priority attention. Let's go a step further. Today, black Americans, while we're number one in football, basketball, baseball, golf, tennis, track, and presidential politics, we're number one in infant mortality. Number one in short life expectancy by 7 years. Number one in home foreclosures. Number one in church foreclosures. Number one in student loan defaults. Number one in credit card scams. And so we need heavy lifting at the bottom of this economy up. I want to stay a little close to your first one about kind of who are we, because the very term black in the context of America takes on the kind of electricity. The term black makes people overreact. Tomorrow, there is a rally in Washington. 100,000 Latinos are marching for comprehensive immigration reform and bilingual education. Of course they want that. That is within a multicultural arrangement. Each of the member groups have primary agendas and they have common agendas. And so tomorrow they'll march for a comprehensive immigration reform, and the White House is deliberating how it handles that agenda. The don't ask, don't tell was the gay lesbian agenda, and that has been addressed. The issue about the bank bailout. We demonstrate they use lobbyists. And their lobbyists say if we fail, America will fail. And so we bail them out. And that was a good thing, perhaps, but it was not linked to lending. It was not linked to reinvestment. It was not linked to honoring civil rights laws. So the banks got the bailout, didn't honor fair lending laws, didn't honor fair housing laws, did not honor did not honor CPA, did not honor affirmative action laws. So these banks, watch this, engaged in something called reverse redlining. They broke the law without any penalty for breaking the law. The same day that the president addressed the matter of Dr. Gates and Crowley on the issue of an incident that took on the media firestorm. That same day, Lisa Madigan, the Attorney General, had a press conference in Chicago filing a lawsuit against a bank that got bailout, but the bank did not lend. That bank targeted blacks and Latino people on South and West Side Chicago. Blacks and browns making $100,000 a year got subprime high-cost loans. Whites making $50,000 a year got low-cost prime loans. The fact is it did not help white or black, because at the end of the day, when we begin to face foreclosure, since every time one house is in foreclosure, 9 houses lose value, we were evicted and couldn't pay taxes. They won the water, and the house was worth more than they were paying for it. So guess what? We began to lose police and teachers and firemen and librarians. In some real sense, the black agenda is the American agenda. That's why I like the idea of his being America's president. Most American presidents have not been America's president, and so deal with the members of that family and based upon priorities and pain. I would say lastly that the black agenda is the humane agenda. It is the lost sheep agenda. It is the democratic agenda. It's the healing agenda. It's the offset the hypocrisy agenda. The idea that some people are 3/5 of a human being, and that blessed by churches and politics and scholars, and others were 7/5. They taught some people to be superior and conditioned others to be inferior. Our struggle was a struggle to even the playing field. Why are we so dominant in football, basketball? But it's hard to be the best basketball player in the world. It's hard to be the best, but the reality is that there's something now going on called March Madness basketball. We dominate, but May Sadness at graduation time. What is the disparity here? Why are we so good on the court and so weak off the court? Because why are we so good? Whenever the playing field is even, and the rules are public, and the goals are clear, the referee is fair, we can make it. But when you look at where we are today, the rules beyond the playing field are not fair. So the black agenda really is America's, and I might add in closing, Dr. Ron, is that our agenda has never been the left agenda. It's always been the moral center. The 13th Amendment in the slavery and indentured servitude, it was the moral agenda. The 54 decision pulled down walls for all locked behind both sides of an artificial wall made by law and culture. The Voting Rights Act of '65 was not just the black agenda driven by blacks, but guess what? White women couldn't serve on juries. Farmers who couldn't pay the poll tax couldn't vote. 18-year-olds couldn't vote. You couldn't vote residency where you went to college. We had to democratize democracy and have proportionality. And so I would say to you that the black agenda is the moral center agenda. That in slavery time, if the right said, treat them as you want to, they are your property. The left wing said, be kind to them. That's the left. Our agenda was end that system. We must end the system of oppression. And I say to you today that the black agenda is winning, from ending slavery, to ending legal Jim Crow, to the right to vote, to electing a president. Our agenda, the moral agenda, is marching on. We are a better nation because of our morally centered. Our agenda is good for the healing of America. Our agenda has never been exclusion. Our agenda is the canary in the mine. We've always been that force that has been good for America's redemption, and we remain in that coveted moral position.
Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm so glad that Reverend Jackson helps us historically situate what the black agenda has meant to this country. And I love his clear and concise statement that the black agenda is winning in America. The black agenda has always been good for America, and it's still, in 2010, winning for America. That said, if we're going to continue winning, there is a role that all of us who are on the team have to play. So I want to stay with this question about what black folk were asked to do to elect the president and what we have not been asked to do to use that same agency, that same power, that same strength, that same intellect. We have not been called upon by black leaders or black institutions or, frankly, by this president to engage this black agenda that Angela mentioned earlier that we've always had. Talk to me about what we are not being asked to do to exercise our agency.
Well, the first thing I would say is we aren't accepting the fact that we have a responsibility to play a role in that. Everybody in this room, everybody who's watching us on Ustream and C-SPAN and WYCC, and everybody who's going to see this that's sent to their friends on Facebook, don't seem to understand that we have a responsibility that has to be played after Election Day. You can't vote change at the top of a ticket and think the job is done. Okay? We're going to have elections this fall. And if the turnout is what it is historically in off-year elections, the movement that all of us at this table are interested in, and the movement that the people in this room are interested in, is going to be in serious jeopardy. Because we don't often understand that when you vote change at the top of the ticket, you have to continue to vote change all the way down to the grassroots. Okay? So that's the first thing. We all have to accept that we have a responsibility in that. You mentioned we haven't been asked to do it. Well, you know, we often do things that we haven't been asked to do. And I would say this is one of the things that we need to be focused on. So for me, we need to focus our attention on continuing this effort to seek change and understand where we fit in all of this. You know, the question here is about a black agenda, and Reverend Jackson mentioned that it's electric. You know, people get antsy when they hear the term black agenda. But for me, and excuse me, for me, the issue is as much about the agenda as it is about the black part. And I want people to focus on the agenda. I teach my students all the time that, you know, the agenda setting process is about trying to get those in decision-making positions to pay attention to issues. But it's also about keeping negative and harmful things off the agenda. And for years, people who are interested in the kinds of things that those of us at this table are interested in have been stoned, roadblocked, and seen our attempts to get things on the agenda thwarted. So we have to show up on elections. We have to make sure that our agenda items are addressed and respected. And we do that by continuing to put pressure on elected officials from the top all the way down to the bottom to make sure that if it's education, income, healthcare, housing, justice, whatever the issue is, that the elected officials know that we are paying attention. You know, listen, I'm a bit skeptical in some respects because I fear that too many of us are just happy that we have a black president. You know, I mean, let's be real for a second. I'm not sure that a lot of us are prepared to ask this president and this Congress to do what we as American citizens, and by the way, we are American citizens, have a right to petition the government to do. And let me just put this in some additional context. From my perspective, special problems require special solutions. And if you don't think we now live in a circumstance in which we have special problems, just think about what's going on 90 minutes north of here in Milwaukee, where in late 2008, the black male unemployment rate was nearly 50%. In my city, Washington, D.C., a city which has done reasonably well in this overall economic recession, the black male unemployment rate between ages of 16 and 24 is 35%. Now, I'm sure that numbers exist like that in all of the major cities in this country in which black and brown people live. That strikes me as a special problem. When Wall Street stood up and said, we have a special problem, we fell over ourselves to give them billions and billions of dollars. And we're still paying, by the way. And so if Wall Street can identify a special problem that needs to be resolved, then why can't we?
That raises, though, as always, Michael Fauntroy sets me up nicely to go to one of the nation's leading economists and the president of Bennett College for Women. Please welcome Dr. Julianne Malveaux. The question is this: if special problems demand special attention, if disproportionate pain requires a disproportionate response, then why not focus with a laser on the economic challenges that black America is facing? As we all know, again, in love, but in truth, at the center of the table, I didn't say it, but he said it a number of times, when asked this very question that Michael Fauntroy has raised. President Obama's been asked this question a few times in press conferences about black unemployment. His answer has been consistent, that a rising tide will lift all boats, number one. And number two, we're going to have to get whatever we get out of the stimulus. Those have been his two answers. Somebody rescue me if I'm wrong, but those have been his two answers. A rising tide will lift all boats, number one, and stimulus, number two. How's that answer working for black folk?
We're talking about social and economic justice. We're talking about the inconsistencies of President Obama this week signing, and we're glad he did sign, an $18 billion jobs bill, but about 2 years ago, it was a $700 billion bank bailout. So basically, the people at the bottom got like, what, 3% of what the people at the top got? Think about it. So you can bail banks out, but you can't put people back to work. There is a disproportionality, an extreme disproportionality in the economic situation of African American people right now. Most recently released data on wealth. Average white family has wealth of $170,000. Average black family, $27,000. But let's break it even further. Single mothers have a median wealth of single black mothers, a median wealth of $5. $5. Sister Blackwell, can you imagine? $5. This is quantifiable data. Assets are access. Assets are access. So we do not have assets or access in this society. The unemployment data are nothing more than fiction. 9.7% overall translates into 15.8% in our community, but that 9.7% is acknowledged to be 16-some% for the overall population. For black folks then, our 15.8 is 28.7%, more than 1 in 4 black people. And Brother Fauntroy, last month, white male unemployment went down, but black male unemployment went up. Last month, just 1 month ago, white male unemployment situation improved, black male unemployment situation got worse. We have seen targeting in public policy in the past. Targeting is a tried and true tactic. We could have programs. You don't have to call them black. You can call them urban if you want to. But why not call them black? As Reverend Jackson says, if your hand, you don't put a sling on your whole arm because your finger is broken. That doesn't make any sense. And so let's look at what is happening, what the long-term consequences are. Because let me tell you, I live these consequences every day. 2 in 5 of our young people graduating from college do not have employment. 2 in 5 of them. So they come to school, they get these loans, they follow the rules, they do their work, and then they cannot find jobs because the jobs are not there, because some of them are competing with 50-year-olds who are now going into entry jobs because the jobs are not there. So we have a case for special pleading. And I don't want to hear the word post-racial again in my life. Not again in my lifetime. And they still shot him. So that's post-racial, if you will. In Mississippi, there are these 2 sisters, the Scott sisters. They are incarcerated for something like 15 years for stealing $9 worth of something. One of the women had kidney dialysis. They will not let her out. She's been in jail 10 years. That's post-racial for you. So we don't need to use these words to cover up the fact that we do not have an American existence as an aggregate group of people. Our existence is different. We have higher foreclosure rates, higher unemployment rates, everything else. And so let's call it real. I could not be more delighted. I think everyone around this table echoes our collective delight that the agenda has been so moved that we have an African-American man in the White House, and we celebrate him every day. And given all these crazy people in these United States, we also pray for him very regularly. But at the same time, what we must do is understand that Dr. King's dream was not that we had a black man in the White House. The dream was that he said, I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their mind, peace and freedom for their spirits, not one black man in the White House. So let us applaud this brother, but continue to do our work. We must close these social and economic gaps.
I want to ask you a follow-up right quick. I want to ask you a quick follow-up because I glanced to the right of me and I see that Michael Fauntroy has a copy of this study in front of him. I know this study well because I've been reading it, and those of us who read these studies as well. The Curtin Institute on Race at The Ohio State University, as you know, Dr. Malveaux, just put out a study recently that takes a real hard look at the stimulus package passed 1 year ago. So if the answer to black folk is, I'm the president of all of America, and the stimulus is what we're going to put forward to help all of America to lift all these boats, the Kirwan study says that joblessness in black America has not been impacted by the stimulus, that black-owned businesses have not gotten contracts as a result of the stimulus, these shovel-ready projects. This isn't me, this is the Kirwan study. And that the federal response to housing, black folk hit hardest when the housing bubble burst. The Kirwan study says that in housing, we've not been impacted by the stimulus. So if the answer from Washington is, Negroes, check out the stimulus, and Kirwan says the stimulus is not impacting black life in America, how do I read that?
Tavis, here's the thing with the stimulus. We had a set of systems that decided how money was divided that preceded the stimulus. So you throw money at and folks just do what they've been doing. And so were African-American owned businesses getting their share before stimulus? No. So the stimulus has done nothing to change that. When you look at the unemployment situation, clearly, I laid that out earlier, we have not seen the targeting. But when stimulus money comes to states, many people think that's the best way to distribute it. I say distribute it to cities, because when you distribute it to states, what states often do is use that money to absorb their deficit. So they say, well, we're going to use that for the deficit. But when you get it to cities, you get it to who? Black folks, brown folks, old folks, and young folks, because cities are black or brown or older and younger than the rest of America. Mayors will put money, mayors are riding around looking at the blight. They see the empty houses. They see the child care centers that have had to be closed, the libraries. How can you close libraries in an era of illiteracy? But you see libraries closed. But the mayors are the ones then who say, this is where to put the money. And so it seems to me that there has to be a different approach. It seems to me that legislatively, our Congressional Black Caucus and others have to insist that this money be fairly distributed. With the housing piece, Tavis, here's what went wrong there. We gave bankers money that they put in their pockets. They were supposed to lend that money. They were supposed to lend that money, but they didn't lend it. They kept it. And what we've seen, foreclosure rates in our community, double, triple. The number of black folks who have those subprime loans, half of them qualify for real loans, for good loans, but they're not getting them because, again, of targeting. This is why we can't go post-racial, and this is why it is required that we do the kind of policy analysis that we need to do. I mean, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, Policy Link, other organizations have to systematically provide the kind of research that says this is not happening, and this is what we need to do to make it happen. Let me say one last thing in closing. A. Philip Randolph went to Franklin Delano Roosevelt in World War II. When our people were not getting jobs in manufacturing, our people, our Tuskegee Airmen were being discriminated against, but we also weren't getting jobs. He said, you better hook this up, or I'm going to bring this many people to Washington, D.C. to tell you something. FDR said, make me hook it up. Now, I don't know if FDR was being arrogant or evil, or if he just meant he needed to have somebody behind him to push him. So A. Philip came back and said, I got 100,000 Negroes getting ready to come visit you. And then he signed the executive order that allowed black folks to work in those segregated manufacturing plants. So what I would say, with all due respect to everyone, again, we need this president to succeed, because if he does not, imagine how far back our agenda will be pushed. But we have to make this president pay attention to our community, just like A. Philip made FDR do it.
Please welcome Chicago's own Dorothy, Wright, Tillman. Sister Dorothy, I come to you now following Dr. Malveaux's brilliant presentation on how we are faring, or not, as it were, in this economy, what the stimulus is or is not doing, has or has not done for black life in America. I come to you because, in love, at the center of this table, one of the questions it seems to me we have to earnestly wrestle with is how we do this when so many black folk think that to raise these issues is to hate on the president, to give him a hard time, to be unfair to him. He inherited all this stuff from Bush. He's got a lot on his plate. You hear these arguments. You're a former alderman. You're on the radio here in Chicago every day. You have wrestled with these issues. You knew Barack Obama before he first ran for office. You took him around Chicago, introduced him to people to help him get elected to the Illinois State Senate here. But this question is real. How do you have this kind of conversation? How do you raise these issues when people think, too many of our people think, that to raise these issues is hating on the president?
You know, Dr. King said we'd take the moral authority. It's been 40 years since they murdered Dr. King. So we are wandering around in the wilderness, and it's time to come out.
Time to come out.
Now, I think that we have the responsibility to bring the question to the President of the United States. I don't care what color he is, because that's when you're dealing with the content of the character. It's not the color of the man. It's about what's going on with our people. When we look at black people today, and I come from the South, come out of the Civil Rights Movement, I have never in my life, even in Jim Crow, we're in a new era of Jim Crow and Black Code, I've never seen black folks so fearful.
What'd you say? Fearful?
Scared.
You've never seen black folks so fearful and scared.
And scared.
Tell it.
Black folks are in pain. And this is the first time since we've been in this country that we've been in pain and didn't know what to do about it. I was scared to do something about it. We marched that night because we wanted to break the fear. I remember a white man called me on my radio station one day. He said, Dorothy, if I'd have known all I had to do to keep you quiet was to get a black president, I would have been got one. That's very profound.
Wow.
Barack is president of the United States of America. We have to understand what Barack says he believes. So we can't get angry at him, Dr. Malveaux, when he says the rising tide would lift all boats, because that's where he was raised. That's not to put anything on him. The descendants of enslaved Africans in America have a different experience. First of all, we're the only group of people in this country that did not voluntarily come here. We are forced immigrants.
Tell it, Sister Joyce.
We're also the only group of people in this country that the American government made laws against to keep
That's right.
in bondage.
Lord.
America, one thing about America, they love to talk about stuff. They say, let's talk about it. You talk about it, you get it out, you get it out. But when it comes to the black, enslaved and black people, they say, shut up, be quiet, don't talk about it, because blacks, we are America's dirty little secret, as Dr. Claude Anderson say. And America don't want to deal with the whole question of reparation, repair, and the damage. Here we have a black president. We have Congressman Conyers, who's over the Judiciary Committee. And we can't even get H.R. 40 out, just for a study of slavery. Something is wrong with that. When we talk about unemployment, Dr. Malveaux, there's a reason why black unemployment, other than racism and systematically what they've done to us, is so high. It's because the government and black people hire more black people than anybody. If you don't have businesses, you can't hire black people. When you look at our community are being gentrified, people are being spread out all over the place to keep moving. But you be quiet. You don't talk about the fact that your schools, in the city of Chicago, they gave the Latino community $98 million to build a school. They closed black schools in the city of Chicago, but don't talk about it. The President of the United States have a Department of Education for Hispanics. We need a Department of Education for black people too. I'm not knocking them. And he has someone over that. When he talks about urban affairs, when most of your urban cities, Detroit, Gary, Chicago, Ohio, Philadelphia, are black people, he put a Latina, Hispanic over that, and never even put a black, just to balance that off. Do we not supposed to talk about that?
Oh, Lord, yeah.
Now, I don't get mad about the Tea Party. They doing what they're supposed to do. We supposed to do what we supposed to do.
Whoa.
You know.
Oh, you're telling the truth. Keep that in your seat. What you talking about?
Go on, Sister Dorothy.
Now, we lose that moral authority, Reverend Jackson. You know, we both come from Dr. King. Dr. King brought me to Chicago. I'm from Montgomery, Alabama, grew up in the struggle. I don't understand. I don't get to be 62 years old with scars on my body from being on Edmund Pettus Bridge, fighting for the rights of black folks, and be quiet when black folks are being oppressed today.
Oh.
No way.
Right. That's right.
Dr. King said that if you don't deal with truth, you lose the moral authority. Blacks can never afford to lose the moral authority in this United States of America. If you lose it, you lose. Now, the truth of the matter is, and people they call my show, President Obama is not addressing the black agenda. President Obama have been told that it's all right not to address our agenda.
Who told him that?
So if you don't address them, don't worry about it, because they're going to be quiet.
That's right.
When you say he's been told that, who told him that?
He's been told by the little birds in his ears.
Tell it.
Because we are so happy to have a black face in the White House that we have to get back in our place where they had us before. Now let me tell you, I refuse, and I teach my children, and for the youth who's out there watching today, I grew up in the civil rights movement, and it's been young people who have really moved this movement. And if we don't stand and be strong, we cannot make our young people cowards by being quiet. We just can't do that. It is not about anybody around this table, Tavis. It's not about us. It is about our future. It is about our children. It is about our communities. We live in what you call representative government. Now, what makes me upset is that we work and put black folks in office, and they say, I can't deal with that. I can't deal with that. That's too black. Now, everybody thinks that something is wrong with you. Don't you know that everybody in this country and in the world expected the president to deal with the black agenda? The Irishmen deal with the agenda. The Italians deal with their agenda. The Latina deal with their agenda. That's just natural. Right. When Harold Washington was mayor, Harold Washington said, because I love black folks don't mean I hate anybody else.
Right. That's right.
Dorothy Tillman, Chicago's own.
Thank you.
That's it.
And the church said, let me go. Please welcome from the University of Maryland, Ron Walters, Professor Ron Walters. I'm coming to you right quick, Dr. Walters, because with all that Dorothy Wright Tillman said that obviously electrified and excited this audience, if Barack Obama, our president, were here today, he would tell us, if he was seated at this table, that with all due respect to his friend Dorothy Wright Tillman, he cannot write legislation that has the word black in it. No matter what he may want to do, no matter what his instincts may be, you know full well that I cannot, Professor Walters, Obama would say to you, I can't write legislation that considers specifically black folk. Name for me, Professor Walters, you teach this stuff, Obama would say to you, give me one piece of legislation that has ever been written with the name black in it. You know the process doesn't work that way. And you would say?
I would say the 1964 Civil Rights Act, because there's something in that act called the protected classes. And African Americans are part of the protected classes. Women and other people from nationalities, people that have been disabled, are part of the protected classes. So that in that sense, yes, some legislation has had us in it as part of the protected classes. The 1965 Voting Rights Act have had a lot of people in there as a protected classes, that you cannot deny these people the right to vote. So that in one sense, yes, we have been named. In a more fundamental sense, we have not been named.
Exactly.
For example, if you look at the post-Civil War amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, one of the most important things about those amendments was that even though they were aimed at drawing us closer to citizenship, what they also did in each one of them, there is a line which says, and Congress shall have the power. In each one of them. They were aiming at us, but they gave Congress the power to protect our rights. In doing that, they shifted the balance of power in the whole system toward the Congress. You remember before that, there had been a discussion, a debate, about whether or not states' rights would really be the paradigm of this country, or whether or not you would have a strong central government. In dealing with our problem, it shifted the balance of power so that the central government then could be the protector of our rights. And that has followed us all the way down through. Let me say that I was so captivated by what my sister said that, yeah, that we have a tea party, we have a coffee party. What we need is a black party. We need a black party. Now, some of us have been talking about this for a long time. But I think that what we are discussing here really is power. Now, I'm coming from the National Conference of Black Political Scientists Convention. It is meeting at this moment and discussing these issues, and we have been discussing them for 40 years. One of the things we know is that no president runs the political system.
That's right.
No president runs the political system. No president runs the economic system. No president. He may be able to influence it here and there, but they don't run it.
That's right. That's right.
So we have been talking about Barack Obama, and that's a great thing. But you know, I was very privileged to have been in the campaign of Reverend Jesse Jackson as deputy campaign manager. And I say that because I learned something I think fundamental about agendas. They are not only a set of issues, and everybody recognizes that you got to have agenda if you go to the grocery store. I mean, that's where the goats can get it. But an agenda is also an organizing principle.
That's right.
It also tells you where you are in history, and it allows you to centralize your power. We are talking about how black folk use their power. That's what this discussion is about.
That's right.
You can't use your power effectively if you don't have a direction to go in. If you don't know what you want, you cannot use your power. Black people lined up to vote for President Barack Obama. They lined up to vote as individuals, but they lined up to vote 97% as a community. And 97% of us had expectations about what would come back to our community. Those votes were power. You gave your power with the expectation that that power, theoretically, would be returned to your community in terms of goods and services. That's the theory of what it was we did. Now, we were expecting that. All right, I think, as I said, that we have talked too much about Barack Obama. Because when you put $787 billion on the table, and you try to make sure that it gets to the states, that's an error in terms of the history of how we've done things, because traditionally, when Republicans have been in power, the money has gone where? To the states. When Democrats have been in power, it has gone to cities. So that was the fundamental error, sending money down through the states. Last year, I'm at a poverty tour in Mississippi. Black folk who are still there, dispossessed, waiting on Obama. While the governor of the state of Mississippi is saying he won't take any stimulus money. So obviously, some power has to be trained at the governor. Not Obama, because he doesn't run the political system. At the governor, and at the mayors, and at the county officials. That is the political system. So we can't sit here and just talk about Obama while black people are suffering. In a way, you see, that's the easy thing. That's the easy thing. We give the governors a pass. We give the county officials a pass.
But Dr. Walters,
We give the mayors a pass.
You're not suggesting, I want to move on, but I want to ask first. You're not suggesting that it's either or. You're suggesting both and?
Both and.
Okay, I'm just
because
asking.
presidents have influence.
Okay.
Presidents can say to governors, presidents can say to their cabinet officials, I would like this money spent in a certain way.
Right.
Now, they don't have to ballyhoo.
All right.
but they can pass that word along.
Yeah.
Now, the problem I think we have right now is that our president has, to some extent, confused the issue. Because when he came into office, well, he said, I can't govern with respect to race and ethnicity. That confused the issue, because almost every president of the United States has done that. And this president, 2 weeks after he was in, signed what? The Equal Pay Act. A month later, he says we're going to change what? Don't ask, don't tell. If you look at the presidential memo that he wrote, it had to do with Native Americans. I want my cabinet officials to bring in tribal elders. Executive order, Asians and Pacific Islanders. I want my cabinet officials to sit down and talk with Asian Pacific Islanders to expand their participation in government programs. I could go on. Well,
I got to move on, but your point here is, though, that he has been doing that since he took office for other ethnicities. Is that your point?
And us.
Okay.
And HBCUs. In the last budget that he submitted,
Right.
she'll tell you, $85 million for 10 years.
a year for 10 years.
For 10
Yes,
years.
Absolutely.
So
Great.
you-
Hispanic serving institutions.
Your point is that it can be done.
That's
He
the point I
can-
made. It
I got
can't
it.
be done.
Got it.
And
All right.
it has been done,
Right.
and he has confused the issue.
Got it.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we're here today.
Let me please thank Professor Walters for being here. I want to move. There are any number of reasons, but there's one reason above all else why I asked him to join us today, because whenever you invite him, you know you get mail saying, why you invite him? Please welcome Minister Louis Farrakhan. Now, let me tell you, there are any number of reasons. There are any number of reasons why I invited the brother minister to be at this table today. But I want to say to you directly that the primary reason I wanted you here today is because I want to hear this for myself, and I wanted to see you when I heard it, and I know we all want to hear it as well. You were very clear 2 years ago when you said that you were going to take a particular approach to to then Senator Obama's campaign. You were going to take my paraphrasing here, you were going to take a particular approach to his running for the White House because you did not want people to take your words. You didn't want Farrakhan to be used against Barack Obama in his journey toward the White House. And so you took a particular approach. That was 2 years ago when he said he was running. Now he's been in the White House for a year. So it's been 2 years that Minister Farrakhan has chosen a particular approach because he did not want to be used by these forces against Barack Obama. Tell me why that is the case, number one. And in a contemporary sense, how do you respond to folk who think that that approach is Farrakhan walking on eggshells, so to speak?
I love black people, and I make no excuses for that. And I'm interested in that which our people want more than what sometimes I think is best for them. In New York, David Dinkins wanted to be mayor. But he knew that in order to be mayor in a city where there was so much Jewish power, he had to pander to that ethnicity. And he beat me up on television over and over again in ads. I could have gone into New York literally and destroyed the brother. Excuse me for being very frank. But I felt that black people in New York wanted a black mayor, so I remained quiet. Not because I couldn't defend myself, not because my ego was bruised by what he was saying, but our people in New York wanted a black mayor. They got it, and what is the result? At Reverend Jackson's affair one day, Percy Sutton came to me and patted me on my shoulder, the late Percy Sutton, and thanked me for not hurting David Dinkins' chances to be mayor. On CNN, I was questioned after I spoke in 2007 about Barack Obama. And CNN said, well, what do you think about this young man? I said, I think he's brilliant. I think he has fresh ideas. But I'm under no illusion that even if he did become president, that he could change the reality of black suffering in America, because when you are running for something, you can say a lot of things, but when you sit in the seat and you feel the energy of electricity putting something on your backside, the forces that surround power is always the real power. President Obama does not run this country. President Obama has been chosen to govern white affairs. And if in that process we get something, it won't be because the governing powers want it. It will be because we organized and forced a government to speak to our needs. Now, look, thank you for the question. You know, I want it clearly said in love that I love my brother. I voted for him. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I was out there with my wife voting for our brother. I, like you, am very proud that a black man sits in the White House. But I also understand very clearly, and we should understand, that it is the White House. And until we exercise power to force that house to address our agenda. Now remember, our dear sister Julianne Malveaux mentioned A. Philip Randolph. Man, that was a long time ago. And the cry was jobs and justice. In the March on Washington in 1963, the cry was jobs and justice. In the 20-year anniversary of the March on Washington, the cry was jobs and justice. We are now in 2015. 10. And what is the cry?
And just
Well, wait a minute. How long
Not long.
are you going to sit around begging white people to do for us what we have the power to do for ourselves? Excuse me.
And the church
I'm quite passionate, so
Amen.
you all set me off. You know that. And I love it. But listen, an agenda is a program, a schedule, a timetable, a plan, a list, a scheme to accomplish a certain result. We have come up with black agendas, but we've been looking to the wrong people to fulfill our agenda. If Franklin Delano Roosevelt said to A. Philip Randolph, yeah, everything you told me is right. The Negroes need this, the Negroes are suffering that. Now you go out and make me do it. Do you think that having a black face in the White House means that we don't have to make him do it?
That's right.
That's right.
Who surrounds him? Let me even go a bit further. I just
It's all right. It's all right, Linda.
look. Our brother is brilliant. He got a good heart. I think he really loves America and wants to make America better. He wanted to ease the pain between America and the Muslim world. He wants to solve the problem of Israel and the Palestinians. He has the heart to want to make America better. But he's like that camel in the Quran that God warned the people, don't hamstring his camel. They didn't care what God wanted. They hamstrung the camel. Every one of our brothers and sisters that spoke today, we have a right to expect something from our brother. 97% of our people voted for him. Yes, there's trouble asset relief program, but there's no. There is still racist America between the money being sent down and it coming to those who need it most. If he does not use his bully pulpit to address that, we can fault him for that. But wait a minute. In love.
Everybody say it.
In love.
Say it again. One more again.
Okay, I want to deal with that word. Because love is bigger than some emotional feeling. The word love, you can change the vowel O to I and the consonant V to F. When you have love, real love, you have life. And that's why the scripture says we can tell that we have passed from death into life because we love the brotherhood. Okay? Now, I was with Elijah Muhammad one day, my teacher, and he said to me, brother, you're always talking about love. Define it for me. And I went into my Webster's emotional dictionary stuff. And he said, brother, where there is freedom, where there is justice, where there is equality, there is love and there is life. Our problem is we have been looking to the wrong source to give us freedom, justice, equality, love, and life. O.J. Simpson was charged with murder. And in a court of law with a jury of his peers, he was set free. A lot of folk didn't like that, so they sued him. And he lost in court because even though he was not convicted of murder, they said he's responsible. White folk are rich and powerful, the rich and powerful, because black folk worked for 310 years as chattel slaves and got not one day's pay. I could call out the rich and the powerful whose riches have been gotten on our backs, but I'll save that for another time. The point is, the present generation of whites did not do this. But the present generation of whites are in their privileged position because of what a former generation of whites have done. Now the question is, a black agenda should be put before them, because if they don't accept the responsibility to clean up this problem, you don't have a lot of time to wait 40 more years for a benevolent white president or a benevolent black president. That day is over. America is facing the judgment of God as we sit around this table. Look at the weather. Look at the world turning down on her. America is bankrupt. $13 trillion in debt. And if you figure Medicare and Medicaid, she's over $60 trillion in debt. She can never pay it. That's why she voted for $650 billion in armament, because she can't pay the debt. But she can bully those whom she is in debt to with fear over her military prowess. I'm here to tell you she's losing there too. Now I close. Our people need repair.
Yes.
We need repair from 310 years of chattel slavery, where black men were forced to be studs, to make black women pregnant, to make more slaves for the slave master. And that same unhealthy attitude of misusing our women and making babies that we have no desire to take care of is still with us. Willie Lynch, who gave the ways that we could keep being divided so that they could rule us for 1,000 years. That sickness is still with us. Yes, we got a black president, but brother said it was confusion. He confused the issue. But really, he never wants to lose the white vote. So if he loses the white vote, he don't care that you voted for him. But if he loses the white vote, he feels he will lose. Dear brother, if you're watching, out of love, you won't lose the white vote of those whites that really understand this problem and know that this problem needs to be solved, and we can't keep relegating it to generation after generation because a few of us got a little money, a few of us got positions, a few of us have wealth, while the masses of our people are going steadily down. No one man can rise above the condition of his people.
Amen.
So, President Obama, this august body of brothers and sisters that really love you want you to use your bully pulpit, but then after you do that, then what about us? See, brother said responsibility. Is it that we should let them take responsibility to do for us, or should we pool the knowledge that's at the table, the power that's in our community, the wealth that's in our community to change the harsh reality of black life in America? He can create an atmosphere, but we have to do the job of fulfilling the black agenda. Thank you very much.
That is a perfect segue to this. Can y'all see this? What's that say?
Brainwash.
Say it again. One more again. Please welcome the author, Tom Burrell. There is a chapter in this book where you talk about the fact, Tom, that we black folk have been bred to be led.
Bred to be led.
We've been bred to be led. Tell me more.
Well, it starts with the idea, Tavis, that we were sold a bill of goods through false advertising back those 310 years ago that you're talking about. The myth of black inferiority. The idea, the big lie that somehow we were less than, not as good as white people. That was the claim. The thing that made it more devastating is the fact they put meat on those bones, and for the next 310 years waged a massive propaganda campaign through the media to substantiate that. The idea that we somehow were less than. The thing that makes it stick is that it is incessant, it never stops. As the media is developed, it is folded right into the media. The images that keep saying to us that we are indeed inferior. We bought it, and we not only bought it, but true to any kind of brainwashing, the brainwashed becomes a part of the brainwashing team. The abused become a part of the abusers. And that's where we are. We are the chief perpetrators of our own victimization. Okay? Now, in the chapter, we talk about disunity. All of the things that we're talking about as it relates to these problems, we would not be talking about if we were not bred to be disunited, to not work together, not to be together. We are 41 million people strong in this country. 41 million, that is a country. That is a country like Argentina, that is a country like Spain. We, in 2012, will be spending $1 trillion. That's the power that we have. Now, you can't tell me that with 41 million people united with $1 trillion, we can't get what we need from this government, okay? The second, another chapter has to do with, it's called These Will Do. The idea that we accept so little of ourselves and each other. Now, the point as it relates to the presidency is that we basically put forth the effort to get him elected, and then we went somewhere and sat down, okay? And that leads us into the chapter, Bread to be Led. From the very beginning of our time in this country, we were put in the position of being stripped away from all status, stripped away from our heritage, our language, our home, our name, our religion, and we were a blank slate waiting to be written upon. And what was written upon us is that we are dependent. We are helpless. We basically embrace the concept of learned helplessness. And so that's where we are right now as it relates to this whole issue. Throughout our history, we were taught that we could not do it by ourselves. Religion played a part in it. Wait on the Lord, okay? Then wait on your organizations. Then wait on your government. Wait on Mr. Lincoln to free us. Wait on FDR to house and clothe and feed us. Now we are in the same position. We're waiting for our first black president to come in and save us. Now, to the question of being asked to be a part of the agenda, the black agenda, that we haven't been asked, we should not be waiting to be asked. We should not be waiting to be asked, because inherent in the idea of waiting to be asked by whom? By this circle, that is inherent in inferiority if you think that you have to be asked in order to come to the party. It is our party, 41 million people, okay? So we should not be waiting to be asked. We should be working on getting rid of the lack of love that we have for each other, getting rid of the lack of respect that we have for each other. We have to start working on ourselves, and I really contend with not always a agreement, is that we have got to stop focusing on white people. And because to focus on white people buys into the concept of their superiority. It is not what white people think about us. It's not what white people do to us. It's what we think about ourselves and what we do to ourselves. That is the key, and that's what we have to deal with. We have to work on what they call this internal locus of control. We have to learn how to deal with what's inside of us. See, because it was established back then on that blank slate, and we learned to devalue ourselves. We have got to fix ourselves before we can deal with other people. We have got to make sure that we restore our race-based self-esteem so that we can go out and pull together as a unit to get this issue solved. So, as it relates to the black issue, the black agenda, it should not be the president's agenda. It should be our agenda.
Please welcome the president of the Student Government Association here at Chicago State, Raven Curling. I asked Raven, as president of the Student Government Association, to be on this panel and at this table because it's so clear that young people all across this country were excited and enthused and involved in helping to elect Barack Obama as president of these United States. And so it makes sense to have a young person at this table. I wonder, Raven, without coloring the question too much, what your sense is of what young people think a year later? Again, it's an unfair question on some level, but there's evidence that there are certain folk in this country who are now a little disappointed, asking questions, raising issues. We're here today. Hispanics marching, as Reverend Jackson said, in Washington tomorrow. Gays and lesbians pushed him on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Environmentalists pushed him to the table in Copenhagen. The Jewish lobbyists pushed them back to the table now. As Minister Farrakhan said, 4 months of new negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Talk to me about what young people you think, your friends in your circle, what are you hearing, what are you feeling about what young people feel now about this president that they helped to elect a year later?
When I start this question, let's say that I definitely think that there is a need for a black agenda. We're not at the position where we can just back out and say, oh, we've arrived. We have not arrived. Arrived to this table? Yes. But have we arrived to the point where we're competing with what it is we're having a problem with? No, not at any chance. But as far as young America, I will say there are some disappointments. But we have to be very realistic about those disappointments. And what we've heard here so far is responsibility. But not only are we not being responsible for the decisions we made when we decided to vote in January 2008, we are not being held accountable for that responsibility. We can't just place a vote and not hold those people who we vote for accountable for what we need. Just because he is black does not allow him to know every detail of our exact disposition in this country. We have to voice those. There are people who are less fortunate than me that I don't know exactly what they're suffering from in lower income housing, but as a person who is very much so beneficial of things that have come my way, I have to be able to volunteer. I have to be able to get involved with my community. I have to be able to educate myself in order to be able to bring my people to a higher level. Let's be very realistic. Everyone here is mature, more mature than I am. 20 years from...
That's in debate. Because I'm at this table, but go ahead.
Let's look at this 20 years from now. If all of you all, God forbid, were not to be here, who would be sitting at this table? Our country has gotten to the point where, no, we don't have slavery in the forms of whips and police gathering us and not allowing us to be in certain places, but we have them in the form of limited financial aid. We have them in the form of limited jobs. We have them in the form of, well, my parents don't come from a certain area, so I can't get into a school that has proper books and educational material to get me to a level where I can succeed. So if we're still needing a debate of this type of level or this type of extent 20 years from now, am I going to be the only person sitting at this table? We as young black Americans and as young minorities, period, have to step up. We are not only living in fear, we are living in laziness. We do not want to step up and say anything. The black race has not come from a history of people who have sat back or just listened or decided to play the race card. Post-racialism does not exist. And to be honest, it may not ever exist, especially at the point where we decide to say, oh, we have someone that looks like us, not necessarily has experienced the things that the whole entire race has experienced, that it's okay to sit back and say, oh, well, we've arrived. We haven't. We have to be able to voice those opinions. When is the last time that you've seen a large body of black people form any type of rally at anywhere near Washington, D.C.? It is definitely at the point where it is a White House. The White House was more black when Martin Luther King was alive, with all the people that were walking that way, than it is now when black people actually have the right to do and say something. We cannot continue to just make choices and allow to let them speak for themselves. we have to speak with them. We have to stand with them. We have to fight with them. Whether it is paper, whether it is voice, whether it is whatever tool you decide to make it be done, we must unite and do that. Every other race, every other organization, every other population has had an agenda. Why is it to the fact that we're so fearful now after we're allowed to get into higher education, where we're not forced to be escorted in, that now we want to get there and not say anything? You're not saying anything after you've graduated with a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, and you're still unemployed. We have to be able to take responsibility and be accountable for all the struggle that has gone to bring us this far. And if we sit back now, we're not going to get anywhere. So the Black agenda is definitely a necessary agenda, but it also brings all others with us, because when you put us at the bottom of the totem pole, everything up has to move up as well. So we might as well move with it.
See what happens when you sit next to Farrakhan? You start sounding like Farrakhan. He can rub off on you. What about the notion that Barack Obama is the first Black president? He doesn't have to be. We don't want him to be the last. And there's only so far down the field he can push the ball. Maybe our expectations of him as the first are unreasonable.
Well, Tavis, that's ludicrous, as Mike Tyson might say. And because everybody, I was the first, so I wanted to be calm and reasonable in articulating my viewpoint. But I'm fired up right now. All right, and I'm gonna just take half a minute more because I want to say this. First of all, he is the first Black president, but we got to remember that. Jackie Robinson was the first. Jackie Robinson wasn't the best ball player. He was the best ball player suited to exist under the conditions that white folk would impose upon him. So I'm not suggesting that Mr. Obama is not a brilliant man. I knew him earlier than most people in this building, since '91. I was with Obama when most people who were Black were with Hillary Clinton. When they were calling him Barack Obama, I knew who he was. I loved him. So I take second seat to no one. I love him walking down Air Force One. I love how he walks down and hollers at people. I love how he looks at Black folk. I love how he looks at white folk. I love how he gives that Negro intimacy that is communicated telepathically. I love all of the symbolic gestures that are articulated from Obama. But at the end of the day, he's Jackie Robinson. I'm waiting for Willie Mays to come behind him because Willie's got a hell of a thing. Number two, how you gonna say you just the president of Black folk? No, Sherlock. We didn't know that. Of course we knew that. I'm the very person who said he got to holler at white folk and wink at us. So don't tell me that I didn't understand that you had to engage in code switching, which is the predicate for acceptance in the larger circle of white supremacist logic, so that you could then get in with a Black voice. But don't get up in there and become who you said you were against to begin with. Your point is that, and I'm not talking about Black versus white, I'm talking about right versus wrong. So my point is, you are the president of everybody, which includes me. I am from America too. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. That's in America. New Jersey ain't got to be New York to be part of America. I ain't got to be white to be part of America. Latinos asking them for something, and they got something. Gay and lesbian said, don't ask, don't tell, changed it. Jewish brothers and sisters said, deal with Israel, deal with it. All of those are specific entities. Why is it when it comes to Negroes? Why is it when it comes to Black folk? All of a sudden, we are persona non grata. I tell you, Mr. Obama, to deal with the Black agenda is what every president before you had to do. How you gonna be any different? Abraham Lincoln had to deal with race. George Washington had to deal with race. LBJ had to deal with race. How come you the first president that ain't got to deal with race? It wasn't a Black president who passed the Civil Rights Bill. It wasn't a Black president who passed the Voting Rights Act. It wasn't a Black president who passed the Fair Housing Act. It wasn't a Black president who dealt with fair housing. It wasn't a Black president who dealt with affirmative action. You gonna be like every other president, deal with race. If you wanna be great, deal with the Negro question. Now let me say this. How you gonna say this? One size does not fit all. When you go to the hospital, some people taking aspirin for hangnails. Some people taking insulin for diabetes, and some people taking chemotherapy for cancer. Ain't no such thing as a rising tide lifts all boats. You got to target your particular reality and tailor the public policy. And let me say this. First of all, everybody ain't got no boat. So you need to make some funds available for boat making. Then when we get to boats, some people got them little dinghies out there, and some people got some cruise liners. And the folk with the cruise liners don't give a damn what you do anyway. So the rising tide is not going to benefit us because we're being displaced by those big cruises. How you going to deny Negroes money, 17% almost unemployment, 9% with white folk, 12% with Latinos, and tell me it's all equal? I'm telling you this, you bailed out the notorious AIG, you bailed them out. You bailed out General Motors, but you can't bail out African-American people who put together dimes and nickels and had parties for you to make sure that you could get up in the White House, and now when you get there, you can't have amnesia. Let me say this. Let me say this.
Last second, Dyson, go ahead.
Let me say this, and I'm gonna be done. It ain't no stimulus, it's stimulum. We ain't been stimulated. Look, when the money, as Dr. Malveaux said, goes to the states, look at what monies have gone to the states. Montana and Dakota have gotten $1,200 per state resident. Those are the least diverse states in the nation. The most diverse states, Texas, New Jersey, New York, Florida, got $600 per. So even by Mr. Obama's logic, if it's a race-neutral, color-blind distribution of resources, even in that setup, black folk ain't getting it. So I want to tell you this. When you talk to Mr. Obama, I love him. I love him like my brother because I'm so proud of him. Don't mistake cultural pride for political accountability. Black people think that Obama is Martin Luther King Jr. Excuse me. Martin Luther King Jr. shed blood in Memphis. From that blood and the soil in which that blood was mixed sprouted every ability of black people in a post-King era to survive. When that martyrdom rose up, it was 40 years from King's assassination to Obama's inauguration. So don't tell me you stencil his face next to King's and they're the same. You think Obama is Moses. He is not Moses. He's Pharaoh. You got to understand that Pharaoh, I'm not dogging him, I'm talking about his office. One man is a prophet, another man is a politician. It is time to say to Pharaoh, not let our people go, let our resources go. Let that money go. Let that love flow. I know white folk don't want you to love us, but you came from us. Before they knew you, we loved you. We birthed you. We gave you acceptance. You were biracial, but black folk made you a black man in America. Now represent us. Don't dog us when we need you. We love you. We just want some love back.
Sister Dorothy, over the last couple of weeks, I'm coming back around. I'm coming back around. Over the last couple of weeks, and again, with all due respect to Dyson, I'm glad he got that out, but we're going to have to pick this pace up just a little bit. But I appreciate it. That was strong, brother. That was strong. And I love you. Sister Dorothy, right quick here. Again, this is stuff we've all been reading. Over the last couple of weeks, a number of stories have come out about the tension that exists between the Congressional Black Caucus and the White House. Google these stories, they're everywhere, about the tension between the CBC, folk who we have elected for years, many of them, to represent our interest in Congress, tension between the CBC and the White House. There are a number of persons who have suggested, from the New York Times to the Washington Post to the LA Times, folk who have suggested that as long as, and the president has echoed this himself in his own interviews, the argument goes like this: as long as he knows that he is beloved by the masses of black people, am I right about this? It has an approval rating in the 86, 90 percentile. As long as he knows he's beloved by black people, he can circumvent elected officials, appointed officials, when and if he chooses to, because he knows he can come right to us through Steve Harvey, through Tom Joyner, through Michael Baisden, through Russ Parr, through Doug Banks, all friends of mine. He picks up the phone, he calls into these black radio shows, he makes his case, but the tension on a legislative agenda that focuses on black people hangs in the balance. This tension between him and the CBC is real. Talk to me about this notion that he can circumvent that tension and come right to the people and get cover.
Well, first of all, I think it is real. I was in Washington 2 weeks ago, and I was talking to some of the black leadership, and they were really telling me about concerns they had. And they said when they bring their concerns, it just kind of gets slapped back. There's no really respect. If you notice when Black Caucus came up and they began to talk about jobs, he just dismissed them. Gutierrez, one Latina, got there and started talking about what he wanted, and he got embraced. He's not fearful of the Black Caucus. I think that black people have to understand that we have really, in terms of black political empowerment, since President Obama been in, have been diminished. Because black people now are embracing him and saying don't do nothing, but on the local level, they're not voting. Because they think if they put somebody in, they're gonna do the same thing. Black political empowerment is really being diminished because—
So what's going to happen here in Illinois? There's a very tight Senate race, as we well know, a tight Senate race here in Illinois for the seat that President Obama used to have in the Illinois State Senate. He had the seat, runs for the White House and wins. Roland Burris gets appointed by the former governor, Blagojevich. He has announced, Roland Burris, that he's not going to run again. There's a very tight race, neck and neck, nobody black in the race, two white men running against each other, so there's going to be no black diversity at the moment in the United States Senate, but two black men out of Illinois, Republican, Democrat, running against each other, two major parties at least, two white men running against each other. What would happen? How would it shake up the body politic if that seat were lost by Democrats, that seat?
Let me first say, it doesn't matter which get in, the Republican or the Democrat, black folks have lost. Because black people don't feel that we have a right to have someone in the Senate. You can be Democrat or Republican. As long as we've been in this country, we don't have representation in the Senate. And when we get one, we still celebrating the first or the only. So it really doesn't matter. But I want to tell you about the politics in Illinois right now. Black people in Illinois and in Chicago, we are very angry. We're angry for several reasons. We have an opportunity now to appoint a lieutenant governor. The black person who was next in line should have that seat. But because we don't count, because people take us for granted, they just went past them and are going to reach over and get somebody else. Black people are really, Chicago is going to surprise a lot of people because right now it's not the party, it's the person who's for the people.
Dr. West, let me ask you, one second, Jesse, I'm sorry. Brother West, let me ask you about the fact that, let me rephrase this. There are some who believe that the critique leveled against President Obama, when we have conversations like the ones we're having today where there are certain viewpoints expressed that are challenging to the president, that kind of commentary makes his job more difficult. It gives solace to and energy to a right-wing movement that he's already up against every day. What about that notion that this kind of critique, this kind of commentary, this kind of challenge makes his job more difficult and gives some heft to the right-wing argument against him already?
No, and I'm glad you, can you hear me? No, I'm glad you raised that because that's very real. There are a number of highly misguided right-wing white brothers and sisters who are engaged in assault and attack and could even attempt to kill him. So we have to protect our brother. There's no doubt about that. And we have to keep track of those forces that will lie, degrade in the same way that we concern with anybody. He is our brother. He needs to be protected. He needs to be respected. But love also leads us to say he needs to be corrected. Corrected when he sides with the strong against the weak. And that's why this gathering is not just significant, but I think the world can see the truth-telling that has taken place around this table already. With tears flowing in our eyes precisely because we know the level of suffering that's taking place this very moment. I want to just say a quick word, though, about what my dear brother, Minister Louis Farrakhan, was talking about in terms of the forces around Brother Barack Obama. People might recall 3 years ago in Jamestown, we told folk, anybody who makes it to the Oval Office is going to in some way be predicated on various interests that historically have been indifferent to black people, poor people, and working people. And it's not just white brothers and sisters in the abstract. We're talking about corporate interests. We're talking about Wall Street oligarchs. We're talking about those at the top that has been making billions and billions and billions of dollars when 21% of all America's children live in poverty and 38% of black children live in poverty. This is not just black versus white. We're talking about corporate elites at the highest level. But when you look at the folk around Brother Barack Obama, Tim Geithner, Larry Summers, Goolsbee, all of them come out of the Wall Street context. So already it was clear that they have no history of being concerned with poor and working people. Where were the progressive voices, trade union voices, black voices, brown voices, red voices who got him in? Now he can say, well, Brother West, I needed to reassure the establishment, and therefore I had to bring in the folk who helped create the crisis and the mess in the first place. I say, my brother, I love you. It's plausible, but it's not persuasive. It's not persuasive. Same is true on the international scene. America is an empire in relative decline because of corporate greed, because of military overstretch, war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq, drones in Pakistan, and still siding with right-wing forces in Latin America. It's in the culture's in relative decay because if we can put the greed and the lust and keep people so obsessed with their immediate pleasure, you can pacify them, keep them fearful, and never stand up for justice. You can't have a movement for freedom if everybody's obsessed with lust for pleasure. That's why the younger generation is hungry for more than the lust, but all they are getting every day is orgiastic free play, obsession with stimulation, titillation, unconcerned with broader struggles for freedom. That's why our attempt here is really an act of ancestor appreciation. We are here because of Marcus Garvey and Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X and those persons who love black folk enough, so in that particular tradition wanted to tell the truth. We're here because of Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells Barnett and Martin King, and you know what? We're here because of nameless, anonymous grandmothers and grandfathers who loved us enough because we are who we are because people loved us. And we're going to love folk from the bottom and spill over even when there's corporate forces around our dear brother that tilts him toward investment bankers. If Jamal and Letitia can be treated with the privilege that investment bankers on Wall Street are, we could be breakdancing right now. We wouldn't even have to have a dog.
Reverend Jackson, let me ask you a question. You can answer any way you want to answer, but I want to get. I've got some issues here that that we've been discussing. I want to get all this stuff on the table. You have run for the White House twice, 84 and 88. Some of us worked on that campaign. Many of us supported you in those runs for the White House prior to Barack Obama. The notion these days inside of political circles, the notion inside the body politic is that if you're black and you're going to run and win, and many black folk are forced, as you know, to run in districts that are not as black as they used to be. So if you're going to run in a district that ain't black or is not as black as it used to be, Reverend Jackson, you're going to have to run a different kind of campaign. Your name is in every one of these articles. You can't run a campaign like Jesse Jackson ran in 84, 88, they say, if you want to win and get elected. And in these articles, they point out people like Barack Obama, Deval Patrick in Massachusetts, Cory Booker in Newark, New Jersey, Arthur Davis now running for governor in Alabama. These are the names that, Adrian Fenty in Washington, D.C., these are the kinds of names that come up and they say, Reverend Jackson, you can't run a campaign talking about a black agenda these days if you're going to win.
Well, I won Vermont. I won Michigan. But that's not the deal breaker. I'm concerned that even in our passion, because many of us have not talked this out in these last 2 years. And I hear a lot of the tension between our joy and our pain, the joy of the President's victory and the pain of how do we handle the crisis today. We are on the attack today, the latest data is that hate crimes against all minorities are down 19%. It's up against blacks 8%. Today, when many small towns have lost their farms and their businesses, there are 2.4 million Americans in prison, those who've been there a year longer, and 1.2 are African American, and 500,000 are Latino. And they are now counting those blacks in those small town prisons in the census as being citizens of that community. Therefore, they get from our being there reparation, they get registration, representation, and they get resources. I'm concerned that some of our own internal wounds between us and our other partners, we must heal some internal wounds because we cannot go forward unless we have a full deck. And if the wounds are there, we begin to lose our spirit. A&T, bless my school, we celebrated a month ago 50 years since the sit-ins at the Woolworths. And yet, there was an African-American mayor woman, Mrs. Johnson, became the first African-American mayor in that city. And there are 10,000 students on that campus eligible to vote. And the election day, 200 voted, and she lost by 900. So the hope coming out of our balloon is a factor. So in some sense, the appeal today is for the president to hear our appeal to revive the enthusiasm and the hope and the unity. Now, part of this politic thing today, on your point about coalition, what links us? Why did Dr. King call it Poor People's Campaign and not Black Campaign? Why in that last staff meeting you had, there were whites from Appalachia, or where a coal miner dies every 6 hours a day, and Native Americans, and some of Shaw Ben's group from Southwest, and some Jewish allies from New York, and some blacks? Why? Because he knew that if you isolate the agenda and don't wrap it tightly, it'll be shot down just on its very essence. So that today we need this. Poverty is expanding. There are more whites in poverty than blacks. When John Kennedy held up a black baby in his arm in Harlem, it was dismissed as he was trying to peel the atom power. When Robert Kennedy held up a white baby in his arm in West Virginia, in Appalachia, that baby's bloated belly and tears touched America differently. It was a different response. Poverty, 40 million Americans are in poverty today. 1 million children go to school homeless every day. 50 million have no health insurance. 50 million more do not have catastrophic health insurance. 20 plus million are unemployed today. And so there is expanding poverty. We must address in a direct way. 50 million Americans are food insecure. That's to say that they cannot get 3 balanced meals a day. In our schools in most cities, 85% free meals a day, which means they deserve breakfast and dinner, not just lunch. So poverty is a big deal, which we must address. And that takes it beyond just black can be the stimulus for that, but we don't have a monopoly on poverty.
President Obama would say, though, Reverend Jackson, he's working on the health care issue. He's tried to do everything he could for black folk and all Americans, and Republicans have obstructed him in that process. That's what he would say.
And he's correct, because they are operating as obstructionists. No president has ever gone to a caucus like he did in Baltimore and faced them head on with the cameras rolling, and they hit him. It was like a snowflake on a hot stove. He just simply outthought them and made more sense. But they are the precondition, a pre-existing condition of tear his administration down. Then he came back and said, let's have 5 and 5 in the White House. A pre-existing condition, their agenda is obstruction, not health care. And so there is this issue of resistance. My point I'm trying to get to this is that when I look at these cities, because there are some forces not on the table, when Gingrich came in 94, he saw people like Kathy Hughes and Bob Johnson, Princeton, buying these radio stations, and you show me a Harold Washington, I'll show you a WVON. You show me a Dave Dinkins, I'll show you a WLIB. His first act was to stop the tax relief so blacks did not own in mass media. That was his first act. The second act was, watch this, In cities above 200,000, they cut off all urban transportation subsidy. Cities below 200,000, you get subsidy. That's the emerging suburbs under 200,000. So today you have 1,200 bus drivers and transit laid off in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, cutting one-third service in Atlanta, Georgia. We are being choked by a bill of 94. We must know that that cap got to be lifted. Secondly, Brother Tavis, if you cut off transportation, they're closing, we're about to move toward 4-day-a-week schools. You cut off transportation, cut off education, cut off public housing, cut off public post offices, now cut off public health, that beyond the president himself, he is a petition between us and some forces that are very much they're trying to take the election back next year that they lost last year. My appeal is simply this to us today. Why I think we should support the health care bill? Because that's on the table today. That's what the Black Caucus is fighting for today. Why? Because it's not only that 32 million more people have health insurance, there are glaring omissions in that bill. The issue insurance companies are taking us for a loop at this point, but if we win the bill, we can have laws and stop them if we win. The hospital's $2,000 a day for a bed. We can take that on. Pharmaceuticals, you get a medicine, $200 in Canada, $1,400 here. It affects us disproportionately. So what am I saying to you? I'm saying this. Issue of expanding poverty, racial disparities, a reconstruction plan bottom up, as in a war on poverty bottom up, and stop the global military budget. Tavis, I made the case all of us today. We must rally behind that bill, because if that bill loses, if he loses this fight for the health care, we lose public education, public transportation, public post office, public option, and civil rights. So sometimes politics gets very particular. What's the bill, the stakes are higher than the bill. I say today, even as we jostle to get our positions clear, don't miss the politics, the health care, and obstructions in 2010.
I'm coming, Angela, 1 second. Dr. Malveaux. Dr. Malveaux.
I want us to step back just a little bit and think about some of the things that the president has put on the table in terms of the long-term survival of this nation. Reverend, you talked about us being under assault. America is under assault. The fact is that we no longer lead the world in higher education. Once we did. We no longer lead. We need to put dollars into educating our young people, K through 12 dollars, as well as higher education dollars. China, India, and Eastern Europe are producing more engineers than the United States of America does because of the issues with education. The education piece is intricately intertwined with the poverty piece, because what we're looking at here...
Before you go to poverty, I want to ask one question, though. I'm going to let you finish before you go to poverty. If President Obama were at this table right now, he'd say, Dr. Malveaux, I'm doing that on education. I pump more money into that from stimulus. Arnie Duncan has laid out a plan for competition among schools. He'd say, I'm moving on the education front.
He's moving on it, but quite frankly, Tavis, what we have is, and I would concede that the president is a victim of very high expectations. But we can't have business as usual. We simply cannot. And so we have seen a massive wealth transfer from the poor to the wealthy. It began under Mr. Bush, but it has accelerated in this administration. When you start throwing money at bankers and others, you can throw that same kind of money to the hood. You can do some of the same things. If every urban community had one pilot school that the federal government paid, just one, in Detroit, in Chicago, in San Francisco, in Oakland, just one excellent school. But right now, our suburban schools are excellent, our inner city schools are not. And then we, who are administrators in higher education, pay the price. I know that I've taken this a little bit off course, but I really have not, because what I really want us to do is look at our national future, not black folks' future, our national future. We will be a third world country if we choose not to invest in this next generation. We will be exporting work, and we will simply have jobs for the very wealthy. A prison industrial complex, as Reverend Jackson has pointed out, will be the economic driver, not manufacturing and other knowledge-based jobs here in the United States. Brother Obama would sit here and say, I'm pushing the envelope, but he asked us to vote for change we could believe in. Many of us who are looking at economic trends expected or hoped for some form of radical transformation, not this micro business as usual with a tiny little tweak here and a tiny little tweak there. And that's what we're getting. And so when you see money going from the poor to the wealthy, when you see us not dealing with the issues of distribution, when you see young people being locked out of higher education, when the average young person is graduating with about $24,000 worth of student loans, and our young African Americans with $28,000 worth of student loans, when automobiles you can get them at 0% interest, but young people are paying 5 to 25% interest on their student loans, we are setting up a condition where in one generation, Tavis, among black and brown young people anyway, we will see a reduction of the young people coming to higher education, and that does not mean the death of black America. That means, based on demographic shifts, the death of America. I admire much of the work that President Obama has done. I am grateful for the $850 million that has come to HBCUs in this last legislation. I would also submit that the Pell Grant at $53.50 is insufficient. $53.50 for a Pell Grant, tuition, room and board at Bennett, $23,000, unmet needs, $17,000. I am grateful to the Reverend Jesse Jackson for bringing some dollars, $125,000 in Jesse Jackson scholarships at Bennett College for Women, and we are so grateful for that. We need other folks to step up and do that kind of thing. But nationally, we should not depend on charity for our nation's long-term brain trust. We have to really talk about our young people and investing in them. Young people, y'all voted for Brother Obama, about 70% of you. What has been your return? Young people should, student loans, 0%. That ought to be one of the things that's out there. And he's pushed hard, but let's push harder because we can change this country if we have the collective will.
I want to ask Minister Farrakhan something in just a second after I let Angela, I can see her eyebrows raising. What are you going to say, Angela? Yes.
That's right. Yeah. I have to get in here because
you are in. Go ahead.
I have to get in here because we need some facts on this table. We need some facts on this table about what has happened and about what resources are available. The thing that drew me to you, Tavis, was when we were doing the Covenant with Black America, that you insisted and we provided data so that we could see where we started. And we've been talking about how poor we are, how sick we are, how homeless we are, all of those issues. Then we said, what can you do about it? And how do you nuance the answer? Don't just say, we need health, but what exactly do we need? So let's talk about what we've gotten and what we asked for, and remember that. And if you all haven't read the Covenant with Black America, get it and read it because it's still pertinent today. Education. I just want to take education. We said we needed early childhood development programs, $10 billion in early education. We said that community colleges are so important, particularly for young African American children, because that's where they often end up. $12.3 billion for community college initiative. We said that there are good schools in every community that we can go to. You show me a community and I can show you at least one excellent school. Why is it that those excellent schools are not the rule? $4.3 billion in Race to the Top to try to find the initiatives and the good schools and invest in them more. We said on the health front, yes, we want to focus on the health bill, and I so agree with Reverend Jackson, we must pass this health bill that is on the table, but we said we've got to stop feeding the healthcare system. We'll never be able to reform the system if we don't do something about diabetes and heart disease and obesity. And we said one of our biggest problems is in more than 50% of the communities we live in, there is no grocery store. $400 billion in Obama's current budget to be able to get more grocery stores in underserved communities. We said that we have never focused on urban America, and for the first time we have a White House Office of Urban Affairs, and I went with the White House on a couple of those tours. The first one was to Pennsylvania to see what they were doing in terms of getting grocery stores. The second one was to Kansas City to see how Congressman Phleger had gotten a focus of all their stimulus dollars in the 150 poorest neighborhoods in Kansas City, the Green Impact Zone. The next one was to Denver, Colorado to look at transportation and how you provide transportation and housing together. We have said that we are outraged when we did the Covenant with Black America about the fact that we have these different rules for crack cocaine and for cocaine, and this administration is doing something about that. We said,
let me just inject right quick, because I just interviewed him on my TV show, radio show yesterday. And because he's from Illinois, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois courageously took on that issue. President Obama said when he campaigned that he wanted that 100-to-1 crack to powder cocaine discrepancy to go from 100-to-1 to 1-to-1, because that's fair. That's what's real. It ought to be 1-to-1. That's what he said when he campaigned. The Senate just this week approved a compromise. It ain't 100-to-1 no more. It's now just 18-to-1. It still isn't down to 1-to-1, but they're going to send him that bill of 18-to-1, and a debate, I think, needs to ensue in this country about whether or not we press the president to not sign that 18-to-1 until they get it down to 1-to-1, or will the president sign that 18-to-1? That's what he's going to face in the next couple of days.
And I'm glad you put exactly what the issue is, because if you let me get to the end, and you may stop me before, I have one more thing I want to say about what we have to do.
Right.
But on this issue of the Justice Department getting behind the agenda, we have been sending community development block grant money to communities for years. You just take it and do whatever you want. The Justice Department stepped up and said in Westchester, New York, you can't keep getting this money if you're not making affordable housing available. They put a stop to it. We have been sending transportation money to communities for years, and transportation people just making the decisions that they wanted to make. In the Bay Area, Oakland, California, $70 million got stopped because what was planned was to do a rapid system to the airport for $6 a trip and get rid of a bus system for $3 a trip, and the government said, no, you haven't looked at the impact on poor communities. And so I just want to make this point. I could go through every one of the covenants, and I could tell you things that are happening. What's our job? When we said our job is to be able to see our agenda begin to unfold, we got to get behind it. We can't be quiet. We can't let everybody else go out and make the noise and we never make any demands. We've got to say thank you for the things that you're doing, and here's the rest of the agenda that needs to be met. We cannot stop with writing an agenda. We have to applaud it as we're going forward. We have to nuance it and say, do this piece, and then we have to say, and here's the rest, and here's how we're going to help you get there.
I want to go to Minister Farrakhan. I agree with that.
I want to ask one question about transportation. In Gary, Indiana, Ms. Blackwell, you were saying that in Denver, they were dealing with the rail system in Denver?
They were dealing with transit-oriented development, how to put housing and transportation close together so that people get more value out of their housing by not having to take a car, but can take public transportation.
I understand that, but what I was
want.
going to say is that the president is now talking about a high rail system. But I don't hear them talking about Gary, Indiana. When you look at Gary, Indiana, it's a majority black people in Gary, Indiana, and you have a system coming past them, when we should have a rail system coming through Gary. When you were talking about another airport in Gary, those are black folks that will be put to work. So we can't go to Denver and don't go to Gary. We got to make sure that happens.
I hear that point.
The minister would just please, just if you don't mind, minister, just no disrespect.
Very quickly.
It is on this transportation question. Chicago, the train line stops at 95th Street. Chicago goes to 130th Street. And so if we reconstruct, transit workers are green jobs. 60 folks in a bus rather than 60 cars is a green job.
Right.
If we're going to reconstruct, and every city with 200,000 plus one has been cut down to zero money. Chicago was getting $250 million, 94, now it gets nothing. So if we make the rail here in Gary and Pittsburgh and Birmingham and not India, if we make the turbine for the windmill, if we in fact make the train rail cars, as opposed to laying off urban transit workers, we'd be hiring, because if you connect city to suburb, I'm not impressed with Chicago to St. Louis. You can't get from the Loop to 63rd Street. The track's 100 years old. So I'm saying that key to the whole green jobs revolution is reviving a commitment to urban transportation.
The only thing, I appreciate that, Reverend. The only thing I was going to add to Angela, and I say this to the audience here and to those watching around the world, the only thing I regret about that list that you ran of what the Obama administration is doing is that they were invited to be at this table to run that list for themselves. And I'm only saying that because I think when we have these kinds of public conversations at tables like these, where there are challenges being put forth, the administration has to do respectfully, in love, a better job of sending somebody to this table to participate in this conversation with Black America about the issues that we are wrestling with. You shouldn't have had to do that. The administration should have done that.
I'm proud to do it. I'm proud to do it because I was proud of the covenant with Black America. And
sure.
I want everybody who worked on that covenant to
Absolutely.
know we're working on it, you work on it, we all have to work on it.
We're on the same page on that. I'm just saying that I think these public...
Why do they got to be so undercover about it? Here's my point. I just want to say this, Ms. Blackwell. Everything you said is brilliant and on target, but here's the problem. We're not simply talking about statistical and empirical verification for what they have done substantially. We get that. But when you look at the fact that we can't get any public recognition, there's no shame about going on and dealing with the problems of Israel versus Palestine. There's no shame in dealing with don't ask, don't tell. There's no shame in dealing with the results of the competition between South versus North. Why is there such an aggregate and a constant assumption in the Obama administration that to acknowledge blackness as a legitimate participant in the American scene democratically is something that is for shame? I'm not going to be involved with anybody who's ashamed to admit me. If the price of admission to the party is the denial of my body, I'm paying too high a price. And I'm saying the Obama administration must be honest and open about what they're doing to help and facilitate African American people without alienating. This is what Minister Farrakhan said. The white folk who love you gonna love you regardless. The white folk who don't love you ain't gonna love you. If you delivered their babies every Sunday morning with gloves on your back, it's not gonna happen. The question is, what do black people have enough of self-love to say, if you don't love me and you can't come out and say publicly that you love me, then your love is already shattered. And it's not about love, it's about service. Let me end by saying this. When you look at the GI Bill was a universal prescription that said we're going to help everybody. It established the middle class. Black people were mostly closed out of that. 98% of those people who received it were white, and 99% of them were men. So women and people of color were locked out of a universal program. Everything you just announced what Obama is doing that has been targeted to black people, first of all, hasn't been targeted because it's been for a larger urban project that most of which the monies have not come to us. Secondly, Mr. Obama has far more help percentage-wise and overall mass suburban America than he's helped African American people. And thirdly, something that Dr. Malveaux said we need to repeat here. There has been a massive redistribution of wealth upward under the black president. Under Bush, it was already accelerated. Under Mr. Obama, it has gone through the roof. Black people have to wake up and say, stop the bleeding and be concerned about us individually. It's not about giving up concern for white America, but it's about taking us seriously. We voted for him 97%. We need some return on those votes, and black people need to take enough responsibility to demand that Obama love us as he loves the rest of America.
That leads me then to the question. I apologize for trying to get to you a few minutes ago, Mr. Farrakhan, but this discourse for the last few minutes leads perfectly to the question I wanted to ask you. Again, we're putting everything on the table today in love and in truth. I have received significant pushback from certain people across this country who believe that the very nature of this conversation on C-SPAN is wrong. That this is not a conversation. Tavis, take that stuff to the back room. Y'all Negroes get together where the camera's not around. And those meetings do happen. And there's no doubt about that. He meets with a variety of people, and black leaders, have their own meetings. But what about the notion that that coming together, having these kinds of conversations in the public square, in the public, on national television is wrong and not very good, not very wise strategically?
I think a wise man would listen to his or her critics. Sister Julianne Malveaux was a very strong critic of mine. And when I had the privilege to talk to my sister, I thanked her. Why do you thank somebody who criticizes you? Because your friends sometimes are not real good friends if they don't tell you the thing that you need to hear.
That's right.
So when my sister criticized me, I loved her more because I saw her as honest, as a strong black woman who was not going to let a strong black man get away with what she thought I might be getting away with. This is a wonderful dialogue. Here's my concern. You know, in the barber shop and in the beauty parlor, we say a lot of things. But when Ice Cube took the barber shop out of the barber shop into the public square, and then words were spoken about Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Reverend Jackson. See, I said to my brother, I said, brother, you have to remember that this is a movie that will live long after we are gone. And to say what was said about Dr. King, maybe 50 years from now, that movie will be brought up and they'll say, this is what these black people thought of Dr. King, and reverse the holiday. Now, what I'm looking at is not our conversation, because our conversation is around that word love. We love our brother, and even if we have some disappointment or some dissatisfaction, I was always hoping that what was said would be without any vitriol. Because vitriol poisons the communication. Nobody at this table spoke with vitriol, but spoke with passion. Now, I have spoken with passion on several occasions. And the next day, I wouldn't recognize my words. Because there are those outside of this table that will interpret or misinterpret what went on here today. Now, I'm going to say this to America. When my brother Jesse Jackson was running for president, a great controversy arose. When I stood up to defend him, I was called the new black Hitler. An atmosphere was being created by the media where my brother could have been assassinated because others feared his run for the presidency of the United States. My concern for us is this: President Obama is our brother. What can we expect from him? We have many black mayors, but the condition of black people in the cities has not changed. We've had black governors, but the condition of black people in those states where we have black governors has not appreciably changed. So having a black president, and I like the analogy of our brother Jackie Robinson, because he had to be of a certain mind to suffer what he suffered, to open a door for others that came behind him. He suffered much and died too young because of the tremendous pressure that's on him. President Obama has aged during the campaign, even before becoming the president. You've seen his hair turn gray because he's dealing with things some of us may not appreciate what our brother is dealing with. I want to, if I may, just a few things, because I want to address the media. because there are writers who will interpret this meeting. And maybe when we read it in the New York Times that is here today, or the Washington Post, or the Chicago Tribune, or the New York Post, or papers that don't like Obama to begin with. Today I read just this morning that the brother-in-law of Netanyahu of Israel went on national radio to say that Obama was anti-Semitic. An anti-Semite is in the White House. Of course, Netanyahu backed away from his brother-in-law's statement, but the point is Obama is not loved in Israel because he had the chutzpah, I guess you could say. That's a Jewish term that meant testicular fortitude.
Minister Farrakhan, it could just mean nerve. It
Yeah.
could just mean nerve. You did not have to go there, for the record. Let's not genderize this conversation.
Well, I didn't mean it that way, but thank you. I'll accept that. He had the nerve.
Thank you.
Ovarian audacity.
I said let's not genderize the conversation.
Wait. This is wonderful. Believe me.
Everybody say in love.
I want to finish. All right. May I finish my point, though?
Yes, you may. Yes, you may.
When the 12 members of the Jewish organizations visited the Oval Office to press him about not pushing Israel for the settlements in the West Bank, and he had the nerve to push back and say, you got nothing under Bush, and he stood up. Well, he's suffering now. This attack on the president is real. I would not want them to think we are a part of their motivation and their attack on our brothers. Please hear me. When a Baptist preacher could stand up in his church and say that he's offering precatory prayers. I never heard the word before, so I had to look it up. But it meant that he was praying that God would kill President Obama. Now they have our brother as a socialist, and they've shown him now with Hitler's mustache. They are demonizing him. And this is feeding that racist element in this country that would like to take him out. And I'm talking about assassination. He came into office riding on a train from Philadelphia to Washington because that was the path of Lincoln. He is more akin to the Kennedy brothers than many. He's very lovable and likable and popular and beautiful. And his wife, the most beautiful black woman to be by his side with beautiful black children, that they have styled her as a chimpanzee. Oh, man. So I'm concerned today of how this media will interpret the good thing that Tavis Smiley and all of us gathered at this table are here to do, which is to say to our brother president, think about us. Speak and use your bully pulpit to encourage people to give justice. Because Martin Luther King said, it is not your power that makes you great. It is a nation's righteousness that makes them great. Wow. And he said, how would you like to be remembered? He said, I want to be remembered as a drum major for justice. Yeah. And at this table, out of love for our brother, we are calling him to fight for justice for those deprived of it. Yeah. But if the racist element in this country, which is very strong, decide that if the health bill passes, Obama is winning. He's gone past the Republicans now, but he's fighting with his own Democratic brethren who have been hamstringing him as well. He's walking a very tight rope with no safety net under it. Now, if the media mistakes our loving critique, admonition, rebuke, and exhortation to our brother,
tell it, minister.
and then say that we hate him, and then use this as a stamp of approval on a death warrant for our brother, then none of us will ever be able to stand in front of our people again if they believe that we join this conversation as haters of our brother. So we want to make that very clear. Love. Very clear. Now, last point I'm making. The last point. If you don't like our brother, vote him out. We can bear to lose an election, but we cannot bear to make Michelle and her children fatherless and husbandless, as we saw with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm warning you, America, they got it on YouTube, should he be assassinated? That's right. And nobody's jumping on the preacher who's praying that God kills him. Right. See, this is real in America when you disturb the powers that run things. I'll close with this. Our brother was selected before he was elected. Wait a minute. Now, all of you know something about kingmakers. When people in back rooms come to somebody who's popular, somebody who's intelligent, that don't speak with a Negro dialect, a light-skinned Negro, that is non-threatening to white people because they can see themselves in him because he's part them and part us. This is political scheming, which Senator Reid got involved in. He didn't mean no harm. He was just talking about the white mentality.
Right. That's right.
So now, when you select a man, The man may never know what your purpose was, because I understand that his initial victory in Iowa was financed largely by Goldman Sachs. I don't know the truth. That's what I've read. Now look, who selected a junior senator that hadn't even got his foot wet in the Senate and made him believe that he, from that position, could become president of the United States? I suggest to you that the people that looked at him and saw his brilliance, saw that that brilliance could be used for a purpose that was not our agenda. Now, I'm closing now. The people that chose him know the time that we are living at the end of America's rule as a great power in the world. Now, you have to face it. She's bankrupt. What are you going to do when the dollar is worth nothing? They are printing money out of thin air to back these programs. So my brother may be disappointing some that thought he would be what maybe he has the nerve not to be. So I say to all of you in this room and all who are watching by television, we need to pray for our brother and his family and warn America, leave that brother alone.
Minister Farrakhan?
Let me.
Question. I have a question for Minister Farrakhan. And it's a very serious question. I heard what you said, and I understand what you're saying. But what you gave is, you just gave reasons why, to the average person that might be listening out there, and really I tell you, we're operating under fear right now. And the average person will now say, Minister Farrakhan said this, so I might not need to move. I might not need to do anything in terms of our agenda, and our people to move. I know what you're saying. It can be said that that's why we don't need to do anything.
Right.
But you got millions of families, black families in America, black babies, black men, black women, who are suffering. Who speaks for them? Nobody in America right now speaks for black people, whether they're elected, anointed, or appointed. Whenever they mention black people, they say minority, or they say women, Hispanic, black people. The Latino community, Hispanic is really, first of all, not a race, it's a culture. And so they come together around common cause to get something. We work with Latino, we didn't work with Hispanic, we work with the Latino, which is a whole different thing. So you have Gutierrez who have no problems talking about the Latino community. You have your white Tea Party, you have Lipinski, all the rest of them talking about the white community. You have labor, and I know a lot of folks with labor in here, pushing bills, but at the same time they won't allow black folks to get in the unions. You have them saying, bring us the shovel-ready projects, and you drive down the Dan Ryan or drive down 47th Street or 55th Street, don't see no black folks working. So we have to, and I guess I'm just free. Dr. King gave his life. Dr. King said, if you're not ready to die, don't go to war.
Say that again.
If you're not ready to die, don't go to war. Wear your cemetery suit, because there's going to be some casualty. Not that I want our president. I'm saying that in our community right now, there is no other community in this country that's suffering more than us. You said America's coming to its end, and I'm going to end this tab, because I want to tell him.
I'm going to jump in, yeah.
I'm going to say, but with us, those of us who are descendants of enslaved Africans in America, we have no currency in no country. We have a continent, but we have no currency in country, which means that we have a right to the resources because of all the things that you said we've done. So that's my concern right now.
Let me jump in. I'm going to let you respond, Brother Minister.
But you understand what I'm saying?
I got what you're saying, number one. Number two, I'm going to turn that into a very short question for the Brother Minister to hone in on the point you're making. Before I do that, but her question basically is, we don't want folk to think that you are suggesting that to have critical dialogue, critique of the president when he's wrong, is going to aid and abet those who want to assassinate him.
No, he heard my question.
Yeah, he got it.
But it was more than that. You heard all of it, right?
We got it.
Very loud and very clear, and I will just answer like this.
Sure.
The Bible says the fearful and the unbelieving will have their part in a lake that burns with fire. Ooh. Any of us in this audience that are afraid, the fear that you have has already limited your ability to participate in a black agenda. So fear is what the enemy ruled us with.
Come on, Minister.
And fear is what he put into our mothers so that we could drink the milk of fear from our mother's breast. So I'm not trying to inspire anyone to be afraid. I'm inspiring you to be critical in that principle of love. But as I said that, I'm warning our enemies and his enemy. Don't play with what we did here today and make mockery of sincere exhortation of our president.
We got it.
That's all I'm saying, and I'm also warning to keep your hands off of him. And to the government of the United States, do your best to protect him. You slipped up and let people walk in to a dinner that they had no business being in. Your security is not what it should be. So tighten it up.
And the church said, all right. You got to give the people what they want. And we're going to the people now.
Hello, my name is Raymond Morris Jr., the Speaker of the Senate of Chicago State University Student Government. And my question for you, the panelists, is can you talk more about how and why the census is important to advancing the black agenda?
Reverend Jackson, right quick.
Number one, because of home foreclosures, many of our people are now staying double with their relatives and they're not being counted. Many others are in prison, and they have been counted where they are in prison, not where they come from. And that determines, in Tams, Illinois, for example, that determines both the resources and representation. But the last point of that census count is that census count will determine representation and will determine resources. And so I hope you're registered to vote. Are you? There is no reason why on this campus every student should not use that power. We got too many rocks laying around we can't throw because we've not registered. I urge you, use the power you have and then build upon it.
Next question or comment.
How does the brainwashing affect those of us in this room who believe that our schools can be better when we don't pay the tax base for the schools in our community because we move out?
Tom Burrell, right quick.
Well, it goes back to my one-note samba here, and that is the media. We have got to understand the power of images, particularly on our young people, and we have got to work on how we feel about ourselves against what is being done from the outside. We will have the same numbers if we don't start doing something different to change them.
A book by Tom Burrell is Brainwashed. Next question or comment.
How can we here, get the revamping and overhauling of the criminal justice system in Illinois in general and the United States of America in particular, how can we get the overhauling and revamping of this criminal injustice system on the table?
Reverend, I got it. It's on the table. Dr. West is going to respond right quick, Dr. West. Right quick, Dr. West.
We have got to generate a focus on the prison industrial complex, recognizing 62% of them are there because of soft drugs, which means they need rehabilitation, they need education, which means every church ought to have a robust prison ministry. Every institution in the black community ought to have a robust focus on the precious brothers and sisters in prison, and then be able to generate motion for the kind of...
Back to the people. Next question or comment. Bring it on.
Yes, I am currently watching the Latino community mobilize around the agenda right now of immigration reform. Tomorrow, from the city of Chicago, 200 buses will be leaving to go to D.C. to march. What they are doing, we should be doing when it comes to jobs, health care, education, mortgage foreclosure. All of these things are plaguing our community. These issues are eliminating our ability to compete and to survive. Here's my question. How did we, as the African Americans, allow the students, meaning the Latino community, to become the teachers, and we now are the students?
What I want to say to the young lady is that for so long, our people went around saying that that's old. We don't need to do that no more. We need to be quiet. Don't march. Don't do these things. And other people now are doing what we once did. So what you have to do as a student and the student before you, I agree with Dr. Malveaux, but I think the students needed to get active on their campus. It was the young people in college that led the civil rights movement. They didn't wait for Dr. Malveaux.
That's right.
They didn't work for Tavis. They saw injustice and they mobilized and organized it. I hope that the young people across this country will mobilize. They did it in Gina, but something happened. This government shut them down so that the young folks wouldn't be powerful.
Dorothy.
So we want them to mobilize.
I thank you. Next question or comment, please.
My name is Avery Bolden, and I go to a CPS school, and I was wondering what would happen to me if the budget cuts kept me from going to school. I don't know what education I would get and where would I go. And if I didn't get a job, I wouldn't be able to eat, and if I wouldn't be able to eat, I would die, and that'd be one less person in the world.
Reverend Jackson, right quick.
We owe it to you to fight for equal, high-quality public education for all of you, not just education for a few. There are some things we're marching about, voting about, going to jail about. It is you. We must make a commitment to you, and we must honor that commitment.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson. Next question or comment?
Yes, my question for the panel today is, what can we do collectively to address the issue of black-on-black violence and keep our young black men on track?
Brother Dyson? Brother Dyson has a brother, in fact, who is incarcerated.
Right. The first thing is not to be violent yourself. Number one, because there are multiple ways to resolve disputes. We got to stop the culture of machismo that says, I'm a man, you step on my shoes, I'm gonna kill you. That's number one. Value your brothers and sisters more than you value your shoes or your car or your clothes. Number two, do what we're talking about today. Love blackness so much that all the hate is squeezed outside of you, that when you see another black person, you love them even if you disagree with them. Finally, as Minister Farrakhan said, we are here because we love black America. We don't love one man more than we love America, but because we are black America, we love that one man. We want the love to be reciprocal. The same with young black people. The moment we begin to discover who we are, study as much as we can about the greatness that we've come through, we will not be able to kill the future because we appreciate the past.
Next question or comment, please.
I want to know, everybody worried about the economics and the job crisis, but what about our safety in the streets, and why, like organizations like Ceasefire, we only see them when people die? Why we don't see them on a regular basis in the communities, in our neighborhoods? And I also want to know, what can we do about the rap music that's messing our kids' minds up?
Dyson. Tom?
Okay,
right quick.
Here's the deal. 95% of black kids are murdered by other black kids, okay? Now, how do you figure that you take a kid who is wounded psychologically, spiritually, there with a rapper yelling in his ear, to rhythm, bust a head, tell the white meat shows, put 6 in the clip, and you are judged, your manhood is judged by how many people you can kill? And how do you expect that not to have an effect on that kid?
Dyson, you agree with that?
There's no one-to-one correlation between consuming rap music and consequent behavior. I know we want to think that. I ain't got time to break that down. George Bush ain't listening to no rap music and then killed a bunch of people in terms of the military. Not individually, not individually. I know some ministers beating their wives listening to gospel music. So my point is, if you listen to the best of hip-hop, I just wrote a book on Nas. I just wrote a book on, Tupac. I believe in hip-hop. I believe in being critical of it. It has destructive elements, especially for young, vulnerable minds that are listening to that music. It can glorify, but it doesn't create. So what we have to do then is create infrastructures where the rap music is seen as the result of the pathology, not the cause. It's a two-way street.
Dr. West, right quick.
I think it's very important to keep in mind one of the most popular songs out right now is a song by my dear brother Raheem Devon called Living Like It's Bulletproof, which is to say it represents voices within hip-hop. It's the Raw Diggers, the Malik Yusufs, it's the Rhyme Fest, it's Lupe Fiasco, it's Jill Scott, it's Angie Stone. There's a whole host of artists who are hitting this issue because they understand it's not just about those negative stereotypes that are very real, but it's about where the guns come from. Right. How come we don't have gun control? Right. Where do the drugs come from? How come we don't have drug control? Where does the self-hatred and the self-destruction come from? How were we taught to hate ourselves? How do we respond and turn that hate into the love we're talking about?
Next question or comment?
Yes. My name is Marie Smith, and I would like to ask all of the black leaders that are up there, when can we stop talking and convene a retreat of all you leaders where we leave our egos behind and we come up with a systemized plan to address the problems that are going on in black America?
I think, Angela, I'm back to you again. Very quickly back to Angela, because this is the kind of question that comes up so often, which is every time it comes up, we find ourselves saying again, there is an agenda laid out. I'll let you respond to that right quick, then Professor Walters, right quick.
There is an agenda, and we need to get that book off the shelf. You all bought it. You put it on the New York Times bestseller list. Take it off the shelf. Take it apart. Look at it. Have your own retreat. We don't need to have a national retreat. Have your own retreat. And when you finish with that retreat, let's come together and say the agenda is not yet finished. Progress is made. This is what we have to do.
I've said consistently to all the media persons I've interviewed with over the last couple of weeks leading up to this conversation, when asked what I wanted to come out of this conversation, very simply, I want black people to understand the power of their agency and black leaders to understand the urgency of this moment. So for us, it's about agency. For black leaders, it's about urgency. But if we connect our agency to their urgency on legislation, something gets done. But Angela's right. We got to make ourselves individually a committee of one. It's not about no big meeting. This is a conversation to let us know what the issues are, how we ought to proceed, but each of us has to commit to making ourselves, I believe, a committee of one. Let me ask you to thank all the persons who had the courage to stand to the microphone and make a statement or ask a question. We appreciate their participation in this dialogue. Let me ask everybody to stand to their feet. And as we stand, let me do a couple of things as my mother can make her way to where I am. Let me ask you to thank Dr. Wayne Watson in Chicago State for having us on this campus today. President Watson and his entire staff and all the folk who work here, we thank you. Please thank WYCC Channel 20 here in Chicago for carrying this conversation.